A professional fighter knocked out a boy right in the arena. The crowd cheered with excitement until one person appeared. Watch until the end. Subscribe to the channel and write where you are watching from. The heat outside the Grand Star Arena in Houston simmered off the asphalt like a living thing, the sun bouncing from the tinted glass walls and chrome trailers that lined the media zone. Inside, however, the air buzzed with something else entirely: expectation, hunger, spectacle. Thousands of fans poured through the gates, waving digital passes, dragging merch bags, and buzzing about the main event of the night, a legacy exhibition between a UFC veteran and a teenage phenom. Cameras hovered overhead on cranes, LED screens flashed reels of knockouts and bold-faced names, and the bass of promotional music thudded against the ribs of the stadium walls. Everything was curated for maximum engagement, from the red carpet interviews to the beer-branded fight mats. At the heart of it all stood one man, or rather one brand: Harvey "Thunder" Coleman. 36, built like a tank, with a buzzed scalp that reflected the lights and tattoos that shouted over his muscles like billboards. Harvey wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a product, a machine forged by chaos and controversy. His face sold supplements, gloves, crypto wallets, and occasionally bloodlust. Once, Harvey had been the terror of the middleweight division, a knockout artist, a destroyer, but age, injuries, and public meltdowns had exiled him from the top tier. Now he made his money in show fights, non-sanctioned exhibition matches that danced on the edge of legitimacy. That didn't stop his fan base from swelling every time he posted a clip of him flattening some young upstart in 3 seconds or less. The fans loved it. The sponsors, too. Tonight's twist? He wasn't fighting another pro. He was facing off against a 14-year-old. Not just any kid, of course. Ellis Vega, the prodigy, the Karate Kid. A wiry teen from a modest dojo in San Antonio, Ellis had stormed through every youth bracket he entered, earning himself a reputation as the future. Social media adored him. Clips of his spinning back kicks and clean forms had gone viral. Some called him the next Bruce Lee. Others scoffed. Still, the kid had caught the eye of the event planners, who saw something more valuable than talent. Contrast: old versus new, brute versus technique, experience versus innocence. They framed it as a teaching moment, a bridging of generations. What it really was, though, was bait. Ellis didn't fully understand that. He just wanted to fight. Backstage, he stood in front of a mirror in a quiet corner of the locker room, hands resting at his sides, breathing slowly. His GI was crisp, pure white, his blue belt tied with methodical care. His hair was cropped short, his eyes dark and focused. At 5'5", he looked impossibly small compared to the men who had walked past him earlier, but there was no fear in his stance, only readiness. Coach Hanley stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him like a father watches a son cross a frozen river. He had trained Ellis since the boy was 6, back when his kicks barely left the ground, and his attention span lasted about 30 seconds. But now, watching the teen roll his shoulders and take deep, controlled breaths, he saw not just a student, but a practitioner. Maybe not ready to beat a pro, but ready to stand. "You remember what this is?" Hanley said quietly. "This ain't about winning. This is about how you carry yourself." Ellis nodded. "Yes, Sensei. Don't try to prove anything. Just move. Just be who you are." Ellis adjusted his belt one last time and looked back into the mirror. The arena announcer's voice echoed faintly through the corridor walls. The lights, the music, the crowd, they were all just background noise. His world was the mat. A corridor over, In a dressing room lit more like a nightclub than a locker room, Harvey Coleman sat on a plush leather couch scrolling through his phone. He was bare-chested, oiled up, wearing only his fight shorts and a smug smirk. His entourage circled him like planets: managers, stylists, a camera guy live streaming every grunt he made. On the coffee table beside him sat a bottle of tequila, 3 energy drinks, and a small metal case filled with custom gold mouth guards. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't even warm. He was bored. "This kid better be able to throw something," Harvey said to no one in particular. "Otherwise, I'm just babysitting in front of 20,000 people." His coach, an overpaid yes-man named Trent, grinned, flashing veneers. "You want us to plant a glove on him? Give him something to post about after you drop him?" Harvey laughed. "No, I want to see his eyes after he tastes real power." He stood, muscles flexing, and pulled on a glittering gold and black robe stitched with his moniker across the back. Thunder. The lights caught it just right as the hallway cameras lit up and the techs started counting down his entrance. Meanwhile, on the far end of the arena, in a cordoned-off VIP suite lined with soundproof glass, Chuck Norris stood silently behind a darkened window. He had declined to take part in the pre-show interviews, refused the photo ops, and waved away the honorary Lifetime Achievement plaque the organizers tried to hand him before the first match. The man needed no ceremony. His presence alone had stirred murmurs across the stadium. Whispers spread like smoke. That's Chuck Norris. Even in retirement, even after decades away from sanctioned fights, his name still carried weight. Not because of memes, but because of legacy, discipline, honor. He hadn't come for the show. He'd come because Hanley had called him, not to intervene, just to witness. He watched as the camera feeds flickered across the VIP monitors. Ellis warming up, Harvey swaggering, the crowd surging with anticipation. His gaze narrowed slightly. They had dressed this night in the language of tradition, but what was about to happen had nothing to do with martial arts. As the announcer's voice rang out again, calling Ellis's name first, the camera panned across the sea of fans. Applause bubbled politely, confused, even mocking, as the boy stepped into the light. Ellis moved down the aisle calmly, his bare feet tapping the walkway, hands folded. He bowed as he entered the cage, then turned and bowed to each side of the arena, the old-school sign of respect rarely seen anymore. People chuckled. What is this? A dojo demonstration? Is this legal? In the control booth, a production assistant turned to her superior. Should we cut to the promo package again? The answer came without hesitation. No. Let the crowd see what happens live, that's the point. A moment later the lights dimmed, the bass dropped, and Harvey Coleman exploded onto the screen. Smoke billowed, lights flashed, his theme music, an aggressive rap beat layered with air raid sirens, shook the walls. The crowd screamed, cell phones aloft. Harvey stepped out like a Roman emperor, flexing, shouting, pointing at fans, at cameras, at Ellis. He strutted down the aisle in slow motion, soaking in the attention like a drunk takes another shot. Chuck Norris, watching from above, said nothing, but his expression hardened. On the mat below, Ellis didn't flinch. The referee brought them together. There was a pause. Ellis bowed deeply. Harvey didn't. And as the crowd leaned forward, hungry, the tone of the night, of the entire event, teetered at the edge of something darker. Harvey grinned wide. Ellis exhaled. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the arena, Chuck Norris closed his eyes. Not in prayer. In calculation. Something had already gone too far, and it hadn't even begun. The hallway leading from the locker rooms to the arena floor was narrow and cold, lined with scuffed concrete and steel doors. Ellis Vega walked it alone, his GI swaying lightly with each step, the blue belt secured tightly around his waist. Behind him, Coach Hanley followed at a respectful distance, his arms folded and his face unreadable. The boy's bare feet touched the floor with the careful precision of someone not trying to seem confident but determined to stay grounded, literally and figuratively. He could hear the vibrations through the floor before he could hear the roar. Thousands of voices, the thump of bass, the sharp bursts of light. The crowd beyond the tunnel wasn't waiting for him. They were waiting for blood, for a show, for something to cheer or ridicule, it didn't matter which. Ellis had seen it all online before. Fighters booed for showing respect, cheered for taunting each other. He had accepted that the audience rarely understood the art behind the violence, but that didn't mean he would betray the traditions he'd trained under since the age of 6. At the mouth of the tunnel, the event staff paused him. A young technician leaned forward and murmured, "Just wait for your name." Ellis nodded. His heart was beating fast but steady, like a drum roll before a kata. He drew a breath, long and controlled, visualizing the floor patterns of his movement, the shifts of balance, the counters. No matter how much he had trained for this moment, it wasn't preparation that filled his chest now. It was resolve. The announcer's voice, distorted slightly through the concrete, rang out across the arena. Now, entering the octagon, from San Antonio, Texas, the young warrior himself, Ellis Vega. A mix of confused clapping and polite interest rolled through the crowd like a breeze. No chants, no standing ovations, just the murmur of an audience unsure whether this was a joke or some kind of PR stunt. A few camera flashes sparked. Ellis stepped into the light. The sudden brightness of the arena hit him first, the floodlights overhead turning the mat into a stage. Then came the sound. Layered cheers, laughter, scattered boos. A woman, somewhere in the front row, muttered audibly, "They're letting kids in now?" He didn't acknowledge any of it. His feet padded along the walkway, his head high. His eyes were locked on the mat. Upon reaching the edge, he bowed to the canvas, stepped onto it carefully, then bowed again to the four sides of the crowd, turning in a full circle. Some in the audience laughed. Others applauded out of curiosity. A few pointed and whispered. In the broadcast booth, one commentator smirked. "Is he here for a tournament or a tea ceremony?" The other replied, "He's focused. That's discipline. Let's see how far that gets him." Ellis moved to his corner and waited. Then the lights cut out. The darkness was complete. The crowd gasped in anticipation. A moment later, pyrotechnics ignited along the top rails of the arena. The screens above the octagon exploded in red and gold animation as the name Thunder Coleman splashed across in bold letters. The bass dropped again, this time louder, more aggressive. It wasn't music, it was a war drum. And out came Harvey. The robe, the swagger, the finger pointing. He moved like he had already won, strutting down the aisle, pausing every few steps to blow kisses to the crowd or mockingly shadowbox toward a camera. His entrance was a performance in every sense, except one. He wasn't acting. As he reached the octagon steps, he stopped and stared at Ellis, smirked. Then threw off his robe, revealing a black compression shirt clinging to his body and custom shorts covered in logos. His physique was brutal, cut and thick with years of hard labor in the cage. The contrast between him and the boy standing quietly across from him was jarring. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "this exhibition match is scheduled for one round, 5 minutes. Full contact is permitted, but control is expected. This is a demonstration of skill, not violence." The words sounded hollow. The referee brought the two fighters to the center. Ellis bowed deeply again. Harvey didn't bow at all. He just stared down at the boy with something between amusement and annoyance. "Keep it clean," the referee said, looking at both. "Respect your opponent. Show control." Harvey looked at Ellis, tilted his head, and whispered something that made the referee pause. Ellis didn't respond. The ref stepped back. The bell rang. Ellis moved first, small steps, low stance, hands up. His body was light, mobile. His guard was textbook clean. He began circling, using the full space of the mat, careful not to crowd Harvey but not to run either. His eyes scanned for rhythm, for tells, for angles. Harvey barely moved. His arms were down, his stance loose, almost disrespectful. He chuckled as Ellis threw a probing kick that landed gently against his thigh. The crowd reacted with a ripple of laughter. Harvey smirked and muttered, "Cute." Then he struck. A sudden front kick aimed high. Ellis reacted just in time, absorbing the impact with his arms, skidding back but maintaining balance. The crowd gasped. Harvey's kick had been fast and hard, far beyond what was expected for a demonstration. Ellis reset his stance. Harvey lunged again, this time a right jab that Ellis ducked under before slipping to the side and delivering a crisp strike to the body. It landed, not with power, but with perfect placement. The crowd let out a brief cheer. For a second, even Harvey paused. His smile faltered. Ellis moved again, circling. He ducked a hook, countered with a low kick. He slipped under another jab, spun out. His footwork was beautiful, fluid, calm, composed, and the crowd began to feel it. Whispers became claps. A few even stood. The kid was holding his own. But then Harvey's eyes changed. He stopped playing. He stepped forward with a combination, a fast 1-2 followed by a low leg sweep. Ellis blocked the punches but got clipped on the thigh and stumbled. Before he could recover, Harvey surged forward, swinging hard. Ellis dodged once, twice, but the third punch grazed his shoulder and knocked him off balance. He landed on one knee but bounced up quickly. The audience roared. Ellis backed away, breathing harder now. His mind raced. He was still in it, still defending, still showing what he had. But Harvey wasn't done. He feinted a left, then drove forward with a brutal uppercut. Ellis stepped back, but not far enough. The punch connected. Not flush, but hard enough to rattle his vision. His head snapped back, his balance collapsed. He hit the mat. The noise from the crowd spiked. The referee started forward, hands raised, ready to step in. But Harvey didn't stop. He leaned over Ellis, grabbed his GI by the collar and lifted him part way up, then delivered a short hook straight to the side of the boy's head. Ellis slumped. The referee shoved Harvey off, screaming. The medics were already running. Harvey turned to the crowd and threw both arms up in triumph, flexing. A storm of boos and cheers rained down. Some fans screamed in outrage. Others chanted his name. Phones lit up, recording, broadcasting, immortalizing. Ellis lay still on the canvas, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes half open but unfocused. A cut bloomed at his temple. Blood trickled. Hanley jumped into the octagon and dropped to his knees beside him, yelling for the medics to move faster. Harvey strutted across the mat, still grinning, still gesturing. "He wanted to be a fighter," he shouted toward a camera. "Now he knows what it takes." Above them all, behind the soundproof glass, Chuck Norris watched silently. His face had not changed since the opening bell, But in his eyes, something had shifted. Not anger, not shock, conviction. The ritual had been broken, the illusion of respect shattered, and the price had been paid not in money or ego, but in the pain of a boy who believed in the rules of a game that no longer respected itself. Chuck turned from the window. He had seen enough. The medical bay behind the arena was small, sterile, and suffocating. The air stank of antiseptic and adrenaline, and the overhead fluorescent lights flickered faintly, as if even the electricity couldn't handle the weight of the night. Ellis lay flat on the padded stretcher, one side of his face swollen, a gash over his eyebrow sealed hastily with butterfly strips. His breathing was shallow but steady, the oxygen mask rising and falling over his mouth like the slow rhythm of a child still learning how to sleep through pain. Coach Hanley sat on a metal chair beside him, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together as if in prayer. But there were no gods in this room, only consequences. He had trusted the organizers, had let himself believe that exhibition meant something safe, something symbolic. He had trained Ellis for years, not just in technique, but in discipline, in respect, in the idea that martial arts was a path, not a product. Now, the boy lay unconscious under harsh white lights, while a bloodthirsty crowd roared just on the other side of the wall. The door creaked open. A nurse peeked in. "Vitals are holding, no skull fracture. We're keeping him here for observation for a few hours. CT is being arranged." Hanley nodded once. "Thank you." He didn't look up. Behind the curtain, voices buzzed. Event staff, medics, organizers. They spoke in clipped sentences about liability, crowd control, optics, headlines. No one spoke about Ellis like a human being. Just a moment. An incident. A PR concern. A quiet knock came from the hallway. Hanley turned. The door opened slowly. Chuck Norris stepped inside. There was no fanfare, no camera following him, no microphone clipped to his shirt. He wore a plain gray jacket, jeans, and black boots that made no sound on the linoleum floor. His expression was as unreadable as stone, but his eyes locked immediately on the boy on the bed. He walked forward. Hanley stood, suddenly awkward, as if caught doing something shameful. "Chuck," he said, voice tight with emotion, "you shouldn't." Chuck raised a hand slightly, not to silence him, but to acknowledge that no words were needed. He stopped at the foot of the stretcher and looked at Ellis, long and silently. The boy's face was pale, lips slightly parted beneath the clear plastic of the oxygen mask. "He stayed standing as long as he could," Hanley said, his voice cracking. "He showed respect, all the way through." Chuck didn't move for several seconds. Then, quietly, he said, "I know." The words weren't just an observation. They were a confirmation. He had seen it. Not the blood, not the fall. But the moment Ellis refused to betray what he believed in, even as the crowd mocked him, even as the other man broke the pact. Chuck looked at Hanley. "What happens now?" he asked. Hanley shrugged. "Doctors say he'll recover. Some bruising, maybe a concussion. Emotionally?" He shook his head. "I don't know. He was proud to be on that mat. He didn't see this coming." Chuck nodded slowly. He turned back to Ellis. The door behind them burst open. A junior promoter stepped in, headset askew, holding a clipboard. His face was flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. "Coach Hanley, we need a statement from you ASAP. Press is demanding answers. There's talk online that this was staged. Others say you put your kid in harm's way. We're getting hammered. Sponsors are starting to call. Can you—" Chuck turned. The promoter stopped mid-sentence. "I'll give them a statement," Chuck said evenly. The promoter blinked. "Mr. Norris, I don't think—" "Write this down," Chuck said. A boy walked onto that mat believing in discipline, in honor, in the promise that this sport could mean something more than entertainment. He got punished for that, and every adult who stood by and let it happen should be ashamed. Silence. "Now, get out," Chuck finished. The promoter backed out quickly. Hanley exhaled. "They're scrambling. They should be." Back in the arena, the roar had resumed. The next match was about to begin. The crowd, restless from the chaos of the previous fight, was eager for normalcy, for something clean, familiar, something forgettable. But they weren't going to get that, because Harvey Coleman wasn't done. Out in the ring, he had reclaimed the center mat, shirt off, flexing, barking at the cameras. The crew had tried to shepherd him out, but Harvey had refused to go. His voice boomed over the sound system. "That kid got a taste of real fighting. What, y'all upset? Thought this was ballet class?" The crowd didn't know how to respond. Some cheered, others booed. Most watched, uncertain whether to admire his bravado or condemn his cruelty. Harvey grinned wide and pointed at the cameras. "Let's see who's next. Come on, send me another one. Somebody with a pair." Backstage, Chuck watched the feed on a small monitor in the hallway. The camera zoomed in on Harvey as he paced the cage, demanding another opponent, calling out the UFC, calling out any punk in the back who thinks they're a fighter. And then, on screen, the shot changed. It shifted to the entrance tunnel, and there, standing beneath the shadowed arch, was Chuck Norris. No music, no lights, just presence. The audience reacted before they could process. A gasp rippled through the crowd like thunder. The noise surged, not with excitement, but with something deeper: reverence, tension. In the booth, the commentators fell silent. In the control room, the producers scrambled, whispering questions no one could answer. Chuck began walking toward the ring. Not fast, not slow, measured. Each step carved the air like a blade. Security hesitated. No one stopped him. They simply parted. Harvey froze. He had been smiling. Now he wasn't. The grin slipped off his face as the reality of who was coming toward him settled into his bones. Chuck climbed the stairs, stepped into the cage, and closed the door behind him. There were no handshakes, no introductions, no explanations, just silence. A silence so thick it made the lights seem dimmer, the air seem heavier. Harvey spoke first. Of course he did. He tried to make a joke, a comment about Chuck's age, something about retirement homes. It didn't land. Chuck didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there. And with that stillness, the balance of the entire building began to shift. The crowd felt it. The staff felt it. Harvey felt it most of all. The silence before the storm had arrived, and this time it wasn't here to entertain. It was here to end something. The door of the cage clicked shut with a hollow metallic sound that echoed through the arena like a closing sentence. No referee stepped forward. No bell rang. No one spoke. For several seconds, the only sound inside the Grand Star Arena was the collective breath of 20,000 people, all holding it at once. Chuck Norris stood just inside the cage, feet planted, hands loose at his sides. His posture was relaxed, but nothing about his presence was soft. He wasn't a man on a stage. He wasn't performing. He was standing. And that was enough to silence everyone. Harvey Coleman, on the opposite side, shifted uneasily. For all his bravado, all his confidence, something in him flinched. He had faced champions. He had bled in cages and broken jaws with his fists. But Chuck didn't move like a fighter. He moved like a boundary. like the line between something real and something rotten. Harvey laughed, but it was hollow. He gestured toward the crowd, raising his arms. "What is this, huh? What's the legend doing here? You trying to save the kid? Little late for that." Chuck said nothing. Harvey pointed at him. "You want to go? Fine. I'll give you your moment." He cracked his neck, shook out his arms, and took his stance. Wide, aggressive, bouncing slightly on his toes. He rolled his shoulders, threw a few warm-up hooks in the air, and then snapped forward. The crowd gasped as he lunged, throwing a fast jab followed by a looping cross. Chuck shifted, just barely. His head moved a few inches to the left. The punch sailed past him like wind. Harvey blinked, confused, and threw again. This time a low kick and a follow-up elbow. Chuck pivoted away. His heel lifted and turned. His torso moved with the grace of a man who didn't fight against energy, but redirected it. The elbow brushed the edge of his sleeve. That was all. Harvey stepped back, eyes narrowing. He licked his lips and circled. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This wasn't a fight. Not yet. It was a demonstration in patience, in distance, in restraint. Harvey feinted, trying to provoke a reaction. Chuck didn't bite. His feet glided over the mat like they were weightless. He wasn't blocking. He wasn't attacking. He was being. Frustration bubbled in Harvey's movements. He tried to feint again, then shifted to a high kick, fast and powerful. The crowd flinched. The camera zoomed in, expecting impact. Chuck turned at the last second, stepping inside the arc of the kick. His hand brushed Harvey's shoulder, redirecting him just enough to throw him off balance. Harvey stumbled. The crowd murmured. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it, everyone but Harvey. "Come on," Harvey shouted. "Fight me." Chuck didn't reply. He took one small step forward. Harvey came again. Hard. 3 punches, a knee, a hook. All missed. Chuck moved like water flows around a rock. He didn't retreat. He invited Harvey's aggression and then left him swinging at air. Sweat began to bead on Harvey's forehead. The crowd had stopped cheering. They were watching now, learning, measuring. They saw it. Harvey wasn't in control. His power meant nothing without precision. His violence collapsed in the face of clarity. And Chuck was nothing if not clear. Another attack. A wild, spinning elbow meant to impress. Chuck ducked, slid under. His shoulder touched Harvey's ribs as he passed, his balance untouched. Harvey staggered again, his face now flushed with anger. In the medical bay, Ellis watched the scene unfold on a small monitor propped up beside his bed. His breathing was still shallow, the brace on his head still tight, but his eyes were locked on the screen. He saw something he had never seen before. Not domination, not victory. Mastery. Harvey's next attack was different. It wasn't for the crowd, it was personal. He launched forward with a low shot, trying to tackle Chuck, to take him down and finish this. It was the same sequence he had used earlier that night, the one he had used to break Ellis. The crowd felt it. They remembered. Ellis felt it. His hand clenched the edge of his blanket. Chuck stepped into it. His hand snaked out, not to block, but to guide. He took Harvey's momentum, turned with it, redirected it. A shift of the hips, a turn of the shoulder. Harvey's body flipped through the air. He landed on his back with a heavy thud that made the crowd gasp. Chuck didn't follow with a strike. He stood. He waited. Harvey rolled to his feet, breathing heavy, eyes wild. There was no smirk anymore, no charm, just desperation. He attacked again, a hook aimed at Chuck's head. Chuck ducked, moved inside, grabbed Harvey's wrist. The crowd felt the shift immediately. Chuck stepped to the side, still holding the wrist. His other hand rose to Harvey's elbow. With one fluid movement, he twisted the arm, dropped his weight, and drove Harvey to his knees. The same lock Harvey had used to destroy Ellis. Only now it was reversed. Harvey screamed. The crowd stood, the camera zoomed in on his face, twisted, red, veins bulging, mouth open in agony. "Tap!" someone yelled from the edge of the cage. Harvey's hand slapped the mat once, twice. Chuck didn't let go. Not immediately. He looked down into Harvey's face, and for the first time, Harvey looked up and saw the man in front of him. Not the legend, not the meme, but the truth. Chuck's grip tightened slightly, not to break, but to remind. A crack echoed through the cage. Not a full break. Just enough. Harvey screamed again, high and sharp, the sound of ego fracturing alongside bone. Chuck released him. Harvey fell to the mat, clutching his arm, rolling away like a wounded animal. Medical staff rushed in. Chuck stepped back. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't salute the crowd. He walked to the edge of the cage, picked up his jacket, and slipped it on with slow, deliberate movements. The crowd watched in silence. Then, slowly, applause began. Not loud, not frenzied, but real, respectful, grateful. In the medical bay, Ellis closed his eyes. His chest trembled, not from pain, but from something deeper, something restored. In the arena, Chuck turned one last time to look at Harvey. The man lay curled on the mat, sobbing, clutching the same arm he had once used to brutalize others. Chuck didn't speak. He nodded. Once, and walked out of the cage. Not victorious. Just finished. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full. Outside the Grand Star Arena, the air had cooled. The heat of the day lingered only in the concrete, and the night wind carried with it the smell of electricity, of asphalt, of crowds dispersing into the vast Texas dark. The sounds inside, the screams, the chants, the pounding music, had begun to fade into something more uncertain. A hush, a lingering tremor that remained long after the impact. The event was not over, not officially, but everyone knew the evening had already peaked, cracked open, and spilled something no one had truly expected to see. Back in the medical wing, the hallway was narrow and quiet. Nurses moved with calm efficiency, the murmur of radios replaced by the occasional shuffle of shoes and the soft beeping of machines. In the far room, Ellis sat up on his stretcher, braced in a sling, color returning slowly to his cheeks. The swelling above his brow was beginning to show darker, the edges of his face purpled with trauma, but his eyes were bright now, locked on the small screen before him. On it, the footage from the cage was playing in muted silence. Chuck, standing over Harvey Coleman, calm and composed, letting go the man's arm as the scream echoed off the walls. Chuck did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply turned, picked up his jacket, and walked away, like a man leaving a room he had simply tidied. Ellis watched that moment replay again and again. Not because it was violent, but because of what it wasn't. There was no cruelty, no showmanship, no vengeance. There was only control, and through it, justice. Coach Hanley sat nearby watching the boy more than the screen. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything that could have been taught tonight had already been said with fists and silence. He had seen what happened on that mat. He had seen the crowd fall silent, not from spectacle, but from something heavier. Revelation. The kind of moment that cracked foundations. Down the hall, Chuck Norris moved without hurry, each step quiet, steady. The staff stepped aside without needing to be asked. Technicians, security, even senior organizers who had spent the night barking into radios and chasing camera cues now stood still as he passed, unsure whether to offer thanks or simply stay silent. In the press room, no one knew what to say. The commentators, so used to shouting over punches, now spoke in murmurs. Their notes lay scattered, forgotten. Words like reckoning and lesson replaced performance and event. The script had crumbled. The metrics no longer mattered. Something had shifted. Everyone felt it, though few could name it. In the shadows behind the staging area, Harvey Coleman sat on a gurney, his arm braced and strapped against his chest. His robe was gone. His chest was bare and damp with cold sweat, his head bowed forward, eyes fixed on the floor. His lips trembled, not from pain, but from the aftershock of a humiliation too profound to measure. He had screamed, not from injury alone, but from the terrifying clarity of being powerless, of being seen for what he was beneath the spectacle. He had felt the storm inside Chuck, but more than that, he had felt its restraint. And it had undone him more completely than any blow ever had. He didn't speak as the medic checked the brace. He didn't flinch when the cold fingers pressed against his collarbone, but his eyes flicked up when Chuck appeared at the far end of the hallway. For a moment, they locked eyes. There was no hatred in Chuck's gaze. No judgment. Just stillness. Harvey opened his mouth, but no words came. His lips parted, trembled, and then closed again. The sound of his breathing filled the space between them. He had nothing to say, nothing that mattered. Chuck gave a single nod, the same precise motion he had used with Ellis. Then he turned and continued walking, the soft thud of his boots fading down the corridor. It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was simply acknowledgement, the recognition that the moment had passed and its consequences had been delivered. In the arena, the next scheduled fight was already underway. Two young men danced across the mat, fists raised, movements sharp, but the crowd responded half-heartedly. The cheers came too late, the applause scattered. The eyes of the audience shifted constantly to the cage's edge, as if expecting someone else to reappear. Something else. The electricity had been drained, replaced with something heavier, reflection. In the stands, parents sat with their daughters held closer, their sons quieter than usual. Conversations that once centered on technique and sponsorships now turned to values, to restraint, to the image of a boy crumpled and the man who had stepped forward not to avenge him, but to show what it meant to stand when others had stepped back. Behind the scenes, marketing teams scrambled to rewrite talking points. The footage of Harvey's collapse circulated online within minutes, but unlike the viral clips of old, of knockouts and post-fight taunts, this one was different. It was quiet. It was still. A moment of reversal, yes, but one without exclamation points. The internet, usually so quick to tear or exalt, held its breath. The image of Chuck holding Harvey's arm in place, pausing just before the final twist, had already been frozen into thumbnails, into screen captures, into memory. Some saw it as vengeance, others as restraint. But most, even the loudest voices, agreed on one thing. It was something real. Back in the medical wing, Chuck entered the recovery room without knocking. Ellis turned his head as he stepped in, his eyes widening slightly, unsure whether to speak. Chuck walked to his side and sat slowly on the chair Hanley had vacated. He said nothing at first, just looked at the boy, measuring the edges of his pain. "You didn't fail," he said quietly, voice low and steady. Ellis's lips parted, a dozen protests rising to his tongue, but Chuck raised one finger gently. "You walked in, you stood tall, you stayed true. That's strength. That's what they saw." Ellis swallowed hard, but he "He broke your body," Chuck said, "not your spirit. That's what he wanted to take. That's what he lost." Silence returned. Not heavy, just honest. Chuck placed a hand on Ellis's shoulder, not for comfort, but for grounding. "You'll heal. You'll train again. And when you return to the mat, you'll carry this moment with you. Not as shame, but as steel." Ellis blinked back tears, his throat tightening. Coach Hanley stepped into the doorway but didn't speak. He saw Chuck there, the boy leaning slightly into the hand on his shoulder, and simply nodded. Chuck stood. He turned to Hanley, and in the brief exchange of eyes, an unspoken agreement passed between them. The journey wasn't over, and neither of them would let it end this way. As Chuck left the room, he passed through the long corridor, now emptying of medics and camera crew. Outside, the night had grown deeper. The crowd thinned, the voices dimmed, but the atmosphere had not returned to normal. It had changed. Something had been introduced, like a ripple spreading through still water. A memory that would not fade. He passed security guards who didn't speak, staffers who gave respectful nods. No one tried to stop him for comment. No one dared. At the edge of the parking lot, under the tall pole lights that buzzed in silence, Chuck paused. The cool wind tugged at his jacket. Across the lot, the last families exited the arena, some walking in silence, others speaking in hushed tones. He spotted Ellis's parents, walking slowly with Hanley and the boy, who had insisted on stepping out for a few minutes of air. His arm was still braced, his face still battered, but his steps were his own. When Ellis looked up and saw Chuck across the way, their eyes met once more. The boy gave the smallest of smiles. Not wide, not showy, but real. Chuck nodded, then he turned, unlocked his car, and climbed inside. The engine rumbled quietly, a calm, mechanical heart. He didn't drive away at once. Instead, he rested both hands on the wheel and stared at the arena fading in the rearview mirror. He wasn't thinking about victory, or consequences, or headlines. He was thinking about the mat, about what it meant to step on it with purpose, to hold back when you could destroy, to stand for something when everything around you told you not to. The road ahead stretched out into the night. He turned onto it slowly, letting the hum of tires and wind wash over the silence. No fanfare, no spotlight, just the echo of something clean. In the rearview mirror, the lights of the arena grew smaller, but the truth left behind would remain. Not because it was loud, but because it had finally been seen. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Check out our other videos for more stories like this one, and share this with someone who needs to see it.